Hi, I'm Leslie Battle, and I'm here to tell you about my comedic chapters. So I think that one of the most important things that comics really aren't taught is the importance of setting goals. And to me, setting goals is very important because it's going to dictate how you do certain things. I think that a lot of people come into comedy and they see people with their Netflix specials or they see people on stage, but those aren't the only venues and opportunity. There's improvisational comedy, there's sketch comedy, people write for network shows, there's performance opportunities at universities, on cruises, at resorts. There's all kinds of different opportunities, but a lot of those venues, especially when we're talking about cruises or resorts, want people who are going to be more mainstream, who are going to be cleaner comics, clean meaning that you don't use a lot of profanity. I think that a lot of people assume that everybody cusses all the time in comedy. That's just not true. But I think it's kind of important to have some kind of idea. Once you've done that first open mic and you decide that you want to keep trying to perform stand-up comedy, I think it's very important to try to decide which direction you want to go in, because that's going to help drive how you write, which mics you go to, who you try to network with. There's a lot of factors that go into where you want to be, that the earlier in your career you put those into place, then you'll be on the right path to get to where you want to be. Of course, that could change from time to time as well. So give yourself the flexibility of, if you try one path and you find out that it's not for you, especially if you're really invested in finding your voice and expressing your voice, that you're open to adjusting those goals so that you can be true to yourself. I think another thing that comedians and entertainers in general don't really discuss is the idea of safety. I will say, especially for women and for non binary people, it's absolutely something to be mindful of. I'm not saying that everybody's out to get you, because that's not the case. But the reality is there are going to be people who don't have your best interest at heart, and there's no HR to report them to. So I think that it's very important, if you decide to try to pursue comedy, be mindful of who you attach yourself to. I think that, especially when you're talking about local comedy, like grassroots kind of, people who aren't quote unquote big names, is that there's no HR. There's nobody for you to say this person did XYZ. And I think that it's realistic to say that there are a number of people who are willing to violate other people's boundaries, who realize there's no HR. So they think, hey, I've got this opportunity, I've got this space, I've got this reputation. You aren't the kind of person who's going to make any of that go away. If you want to be in this, then you have to do this thing for me, which is, classic textbook harassment type behaviors. And I'm speaking only of harassment. Let's not even get into assault, because that's a whole nother peanut. Also, part of what complicates it, and I really don't like feeling like I'm, being like gender biased, but facts are facts. It's harder sometimes to get men to see what you're going through outside of just the need to be funny and trying to get booked. It's harder to get them to understand that you've had a problem with somebody because they haven't had that problem with that person. Which, guess what? When you got the same plumbing as that person, they're not going to behave that way to you. It's not rocket science. But so if you decide that you want to continue on in comedy, like you've, done that first open mic and you're like, hey, I enjoyed that. I need to, figure out what else I need to do to keep doing this. Just be mindful of the associations that you make. I mean, people have reputations. A lot of times these shows are happening in bars. People are drinking. Drunk people aren't going to lie. Drunk people are going to, like, if you ask the question, I mean, if they're sober enough to answer the question, they're not going to be like, oh yeah, so and so's a nice guy, blah 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 blah. They're going to be like, well, that one time he did this one thing, and then the other person's going to come to them like, why are you telling all my business? Anyway, but but the reality is, I mean, you definitely do have to look out for yourself. The flip side of that, though, is there are some wonderful people that are involved in local entertainment. There are people who do want to see you thrive. There are people who do appreciate you for who you are. So, find your people. I mean, yes, it's absolutely trial and error, hit and miss. But for me, there's people who just love, 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 love Leslie. There's also people who can't fucking stand Leslie. So, I'm not for everybody. But just understand that you don't have to sacrifice your integrity to get on a show or to be somebody's friend. Like, you don't have to tolerate bad behavior for the sake of being a comic. Working with comedians can be a joy and it can be a challenge. I think there's a saying that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. If you're working with the right people, you can have the best time ever. If you're working with people that don't really match your sensibilities, it could be the worst time ever. I'll make an example. So I had been booked for a show down in Lexington, and I'm not sure if other folks on the show realized that Leslie was a woman's name. But for whatever reason, the guy who was supposed to host the show, there was a group chat that the booker had started. So there was a group chat with everybody who's going to be in the show, plus the booker. And the guy who was supposed to host the show says, well, I'm going to open the show with something for the ladies. I got a fresh batch of rape jokes that I'm ready to... And I'm, reading this on my phone like, excuse me, what? And so, of course, me being me, I'm immediately in the chat just like, first of all, not funny. Secondly, why is that your opener? And of course, the guy backs back and he's just like, oh, well, I'm just playing, blah, 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 blah. If that's the way you play, I'm not going to play with you like that. You need to understand that. And there's so many people who don't understand that. So it's really kind of navigating like an environment when it comes to working with comics, because the work is typically taking place in what is meant to be an entertainment type of context for the audience. Like I said, with the right people, it could be entertaining for you as well. But you also have to know, what people's character is actually like. And for me, in this case in particular, I ended up pulling out his show. I'll be honest with you. I really don't care if a dude who wants to joke about raping people is offended by me. Like, I want to be offended by those kinds of people. I don't need to be around that. But I think that what a lot of people will do in the name of being edgy is they have this tendency to make light of issues that are genuinely traumatic for other people. And I just, that's not what we're here for. I mean, like, if that's your kind of comedy, so be it. I'm not going to give you like a big lecture. But when it comes to me, when I'm performing, I'm not trying to re-traumatize somebody. Especially, strangers aren't coming into the comedy house, with their traumas listed on their sleeve. Like, people are coming there to, get away. And I've had a couple of situations where I've had a person, typically a woman, after the show, thank me for the things that I said in my comedy, the things that I made light of, because it might have been something that they too were kind of grappling with. But the fact that I made a joke out of them made them go, but you know what? That is kind of wild that I was, putting all this weight on this thing when it's really kind of ridiculous. And if you really think about it, and this kind of goes into, the theme of working with comedians, though. I mean, just dealing with people. It's about dealing with people. But like I mentioned before, there's no HR. So sometimes people just want to test boundaries for the sake of testing boundaries. But at the end of the day, If you're part of a show, some things that you really want to think about too, like be at the show when the booker has told you to be at the show, which typically is early, anywhere from a half an hour to an hour early, depending on what the show is. You don't want to be getting there as the show starts. First of all, if there is something that you need to adjust to, you're not going to have time to adjust to it. There's been a number of times that I've shown up for shows and for whatever reason, somebody else on the lineup was not able to make it. Life happens. We get it. But I then needed to make myself, put myself in a different mindset because I needed to do a longer set. You also want to make sure that you have the amount of time / material that you told the booker that you have. A lot of times people will say, oh yeah, I've got 15 minutes, not realizing that 15 minutes that they have isn't 15 solid minutes. That's, you don't want to misrepresent yourself. Kindness is a big thing. I know there's a lot of people who think they don't have to be kind. I'm willing to bet that people who just can't, treat other humans like humans aren't really getting booked that much. I mean, there may be exceptions for people who are social media giants. Like that's a whole nother ball of wax. But, and if you go to any workshops, if you go to any kind of advice type forums that talk about, like how to be an entertainer, if you're in a venue that has a wait staff, in the name of everything holy, don't be a jerk to wait staff. The server that you're gross to is very likely also a comic. Even if they aren't a comic, they are constantly around other comics, and people do talk. Like if you travel, if you're a performer and you travel, you absolutely have a reputation. Like for me, when I was at what I consider my height, there were like 3 different cities, Louisville, Pittsburgh, and Indy, that people thought that I lived in that city because they saw me there that often. But the reality of it is, when they saw me there, it wasn't, oh, here comes Leslie. It was like, oh, Leslie's here. But there's just a way to treat people. But the right people will see your kindness and they'll be more apt to book you, especially if you're funny. Well, another thing that I think that we as entertainers, not just comics, don't really discuss is the idea of the cost-benefit analysis. And I know that sounds kind of fancy, but you're probably already doing it. At the end of the day, what happens is you get offered a thing. Or let's say you're not even getting paid just yet. You want to go to Mike's, right? And you're going to Mike's because you want the experience of being on stage. You want the exposure of getting seen by other comics, possibly other audience members. Like there are definitely intangible benefits, and this is part of the grind, to going to the mics. You're working out your new material. You're getting to hear how audiences respond to it. So there's a benefit to going to the mics. However, comedy, especially if you're really invested in making progress in comedy, it takes time. It takes time. It takes energy. It takes gas if you're traveling. It takes a lot of resources to support this pursuit. So especially once you start getting booked, it's very important. Like you want to at least break even, right? So let's say somebody in another city offers you a booking that you would do 15 minutes for $50, which I think I'm kind of highballing a little bit. But let's say you're doing 15 minutes for $50. Well, depending on where that city is, that $50 will probably fill your gas tank. So, that's making it make sense. Now, the goal is to end up having profit. So, not only does what you're getting paid get you where you're going and back, but then you have, enough to, have a little bit in your pocket after it's said and done. And what a lot of bookers, especially when we're talking like bar type shows, they'll offer you a free meal. Depending on if it's like more than one show, you may get lodging. So there's a number of ways that bookers can compensate you that aren't exactly money, but they keep you from digging into what you're getting paid from them to do the show. But you just want to make sure that what you're getting out of it is feeding you to the point that it's worth it to you. when I was traveling a lot, holy moly, the numbers of times I drove places on fumes, right? But there was a need that I had that was getting fed. And I'll be the first one to tell you, if nobody else has ever told you this, but there is nothing in the whole wide world that feels like the feeling that you get when you have an audience just loving your material. Like that, I can't even compare it to a biochemical anything. I'm just telling you that if you ever get to experience being yourself on stage and the audience reacting to you in a way that you were hoping for, it's really amazing. I almost said better than sex, but that's not true. But again, the thing is, that doesn't always feed you though. And if you get to a point where you feel like you're sacrificing more of your time, of your effort, of yourself, especially considering the majority of comics when they're first starting out also have a day job. Like, you need to be rested. You need to eat, Maybe don't spend your rent money on drinks just because you're at a bar. Like, there's decisions that you have to make that can affect your overall quality of life while you're trying to pursue this career in comedy. So I think it's very important, again, if you're referring back to your goals and this looks like a good stepping stone to get you to where you want to be, then that's something that you're considering, in your cost benefit. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't leave a show feeling so exhausted, or that you haven't gotten what you needed from it. Or sometimes it's going to be a learning experience and you realize that, okay, that's the last time I do a show for that person. But other than that, you really don't want to be setting yourself up to not be getting out of the venture what you're putting into it. Knowing your audience is very important. While it is a very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a concrete concept, but the sooner you realize that you're not for everybody, and the sooner that you realize who your humor appeals to, the more intentional you can be about the shows that you're trying to be on and the connections that you're trying to make. I mean, at the end of the day, comedy audiences want to laugh, and half the time they're drunk. So, the main thing that everybody wants is for the comic to at least have some semblance of success, because if you're not doing well, the audience knows you're not doing well, and there's this just kind of energy spiral that happens, and everybody's like, "Oh man, that's so bad." And it's not even coming from a space of them being like, "Oh, that dude sucks," unless you're just being aggressive and stuff. But it's more just like, "Ooh, I don't want to be that guy that looks so uncomfortable." So, it's really good to have an idea how your material is landing. And again, that's only going to come with multiple performances. I think one of the things that is really a challenge for a lot of open mic comics is everybody's trying to jump to edge right now and just be, edgy and say these things that are offensive because it's funny. It's not funny. The number of times I've seen people still, I don't understand the obsession with the N word. It's whatevs. I don't understand the obsession with blackface. We've already established that you're not the George Carlin of your generation who's gonna crack the code on how to be the white dude to say the N word. You're not it. I promise you, you're not it. But the thing is, there's a difference between appealing to your audience and selling out. If you are selling out, as it were, then those people are probably not your audience. A challenge that I have as a black woman who's also a military veteran is I get approached by conservatives more often than I would ever like to be, who assume that, oh, well, you were in the military, so you like blah, 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 blah. No, I'm not down with your bullshit. That's not what we're doing. But there are people who may look at you, know a fact about you, and assume that they're your audience. And then they get to find out the hard way that what you have to say is not what they're looking for. That gets kind of tricky when you're first starting out because you're looking for bookings. You end up doing, more than likely, you end up doing a lot of rural shows because folks that are a little more established can usually get into venues that have more audience, that, they have kind of a built audience. But I think, though, too, what a lot of people don't know, a thing that's not talked about, I kind of feel like I'm having the inside conversation out loud, but any number of cities that have a comedy scene actually have two scenes. There's the mainstream scene, which, the word mainstream pretty much says it all. And then there's the urban scene, which, typically the humor is a little more gritty. It's, definitely intended like for people of color, or, people who can respect spaces that people of color are in. And I really kind of regret, in a way, that the scenes don't overlap very much. I mean, it's not that I'm saying that certain people should come in and try to take over the urban scene. That's not what I'm saying at all. And I mean, there's definitely some comics who can work both, mainstream or urban rooms. It's not exclusionary in that way. But I think that a lot of comedy consumers are missing out on some wonderful comics who, for any number of reasons, aren't doing a lot of work in mainstream rooms. I mean, there's a number of socioeconomic factors that play into that too, so I don't want to make it seem like, one group is supposed to be doing more, blah, blah, blah. It's also subjective. Like, at the end of the day, working in entertainment, be it comedy, be it, I've got friends who are burlesque, I've got friends who are poets, musicians, like, everybody kind of has the same kind of challenges in being like a local entertainer. And a lot of times that has to do with like getting the audience to show up. First of all, like, everybody knows that people are looking for stuff to do on Friday, Saturday night, but the bridging the gap between comics or entertainers and their audience has been the $1 million question for a while. But I mean, another piece of advice that I've received that I really appreciated, the best part about being funny, especially when you're working on longer sets, I'm talking 15, 20 half-hour sets, right, is if you gain the audience's trust, you start being able to push the boundaries a little bit, to find out what the actual limits are. Like, for me, I tend to appeal to politically liberal people. I have a number of folks that I work with who are LGBTQ. And so what's edgy for the folks that I appeal to is offensive, hilariously enough, to, folks who are, shall I say, more conservative in bent. And I love it. Like, I've got this joke, and my husband loves this joke, and it's hilarious because my husband's a white dude. But I've got this joke where, I'll just tell it. So I dated an Indiana farmer, and my friends say, well, Leslie, what were you doing on farmersonly.com? And I say, no, we met the old-fashioned way. He saw me at an auction and made the highest bid. And my husband loves that joke. He loves that joke just, because of the joke itself, but also he loves how it splits a room. Like, you can absolutely see who in the room was not ready for that. And for me, if I get the, oh my God, what had just happened, then that's fine. But if I feel the audience pull back on me with that, then I'll say it was a charity auction for cancer kids. I'm not cute all of a sudden. And so, I like to do things like deflection, all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you can't do that if you haven't gain the audience's trust. And so you have to get them on your side. You have to get them bought into you for you to do things like that. So yes, there's absolutely venues that I would never do that joke. But when I'm safe enough that I know that I can do that joke and it's going to land the way that I want it to do, then I absolutely can. So I think that's part of the problem is a number, especially of open micers, are always going for the proverbial jugular. They're just like, I've got to be offensive, and if everybody's quiet, I'd rather have groans than laughs. Like, okay, it's a technique. If that's what you want to do, more power to you. But if you want to have any kind of longevity in this industry, you absolutely have to build audience. You have to build people who are willing to see you more than once. And you have to give them the kind of quality experience that they will tell other people about. Because doing publicity through the venue is all well and good, but at the end of the day, the people who are going to fill those seats are the people who like your material. And even if you try something new, they know that they can trust you with their time and they're willing to be there. Because a lot of venues, not only are they buying tickets, they're buying meals, they're buying drinks. So for some folks, it's, a literal investment to have that night out. And in order to be the person who is, sparking them to make that investment, you're going to have to appeal to them. So you're probably thinking, Leslie, what even do you know about comedy? Like, how can you be sitting here telling everybody else how to be a comic? Guess what? I don't. There's a million ways to be a comic, and it's really just there's a lot of trial and error, and you need to find what's right for you. And at the end of the day, your entire like vision on life can change after, say, a significant event happens in society, or maybe even a personal event happens, and your perspective on things changes a little bit. There's really no right way to be a comic. I mean, granted, I can give you advice or whatnot, but there's, like I said, just so many different ways that you can pursue this. But that being said, if you're a reader, highly recommend Judy Carter's The Comedy Bible. That's really kind of a standard book, and it's amazing to me because she really breaks down comedy writing into almost a like formulaic kind of situation that you can plug in. Now you're the one who's responsible for the context or the content, so there's still a lot of making it funny that depends on you, but she really breaks down some of the patterns that audiences tend to be receptive to. So if you have an opportunity to pick that book up and work through it, that's kind of a good start. There's also writing groups, writing workshops. I will admit that writing workshops are a little bit like herding cats. But the great thing about writing workshops is you have an opportunity to run your material past someone else. So like not the person who wrote it, because I gotta tell you, the number of things that I've said that I thought were freaking hilarious that people just look at me like, what? So having the opportunity to run it by, somebody who isn't as invested in the material is good. And it's kind of like one step between where you write it and saying it to yourself and performing it in front of an audience. And it's also pretty cool, like, to go through a writing workshop, especially if it's adjacent to a mic, because then you see people, who were discussing like a concept or a joke that they were working, and then they actually do it in the mic, and you can see if they, took the advice or didn't take the advice, or if the thing is working. Because we do tend to say, like in the workshop, we say, well, I've got this joke and this is how it goes. As opposed to when you're performing it on stage, you're a little more energized. You may be doing act outs or whatnot. So it's kind of cool to see people doing that. If you really, really, really are into performing and you end up doing some traveling, highly recommend comedy festivals. Especially when you get out of the town where you live, you get to see a lot of things a little bit differently. There's definitely some similarities. Unfortunately, there's gross people in every city, but it's a good thing. But one of the best things about comedy festivals in a way are like a family reunion. right? So all of your family who lives all over the country, you're gathered in one place, and you see folks again from actual newcomers to folks who are filling stadiums, but they're all together in this one bill. A lot of times, comedy festivals give you the opportunity to volunteer, so you don't necessarily have to buy tickets to the shows for some of the biggest names. You're actually like helping to collect the tickets of the audience members, or you might be running concessions, or who knows, there's any number of things, but there's a lot of opportunities. One thing to note with comedy festivals is that you may very well have to be, first of all, a lot of times there is a submission fee. You're competing for that spot in the festival. You may not get very many spots. It depends on how many shows the festival is putting on, whatnot. But I found that doing comedy festivals is a great way to kind of get your foot in the door with people who are performing in other cities, because you stay in touch with those folks. And then if you have an opportunity to go to that city, you can reach out to them and ask, hey, are there, any open mics, or do you know anybody who will put me on a show? And you're dealing directly with somebody who's in that scene. Now that social media is such a commonplace thing, uh, comedy festivals, I would say, aren't the only method like they used to be. Also, and I mean, I know that Facebook is for old folks, so pardon me, but there are any number of city slash regional comedy groups that they welcome comics who aren't, local to them. So if you're looking for opportunities, you might be able, like, literally just, in the search bar, whichever city comedy scene or whatever. I wouldn't suggest comics, because you get comic book stores if you do comics. So that's, just a pointer there. One of the things is, whatever you're trying to build with comedy, you can't do it by yourself. At the end of the day, you can't do it by yourself. Like, even if you start off and you're producing shows and all this kind of stuff, you still are going to need other people. You're going to need other people to perform on the shows that you're producing. You're going to need to know folks from other towns, because you can't just keep putting the same 5 comics on your show all year long. Like, that's just not going to work out. But also, again, being open to see people who are, new to the scene, new to comedy. Find a mentor if you can. If there's somebody who's out doing the things that you think you want to do, respectfully ask, hey, could we, have a sit down, get coffee or something, and talk about business? I've both been mentored and I've done some mentoring. And I think that one of the unique opportunities with mentoring is, even as somebody who's seasoned and has been in the business for a while, hearing from somebody who's younger and has a different set of eyes and hasn't had the same experiences from you can be really beneficial. Like, you can get ideas, you can brainstorm, and it can really end up more of a partnership than I'm dictating to you, this is how we do things. But it's also good for people to not have to reinvent the wheel. Like, it's really helpful if you can, help somebody. It's like, well, hey, this mic over here has been going on for so long, and these are the kind of folks who come, versus, not having that information. And again, going back to what I was saying about, safety and even goal setting to a point, if you don't know anybody yet, then it can be really difficult to, make some of the decisions that you need to make. But if you have a mentor, if you're in with people who are more experienced, who, you can trust, and they're giving you the information that you need, then that can give you more energy to focus on your writing and on performing. I specifically wanted to talk about punching down because this is a very specific, and I really don't want to admit, almost trendy thing that we call them edge lords, that folks who are trying to be edgy seem to gravitate toward. more often than not, the group that's being targeted is a group of people who are marginalized in everyday life. Um, I don't suggest it. I mean, you'll find somebody who is fine with that kind of stuff. I really am just not at all a fan about it. And here's why. Even if we're not talking about marginalized groups, let's say we're talking about people who have experienced an all too common trauma, right? Joking about somebody else's trauma when it isn't obvious that that person has endured that is simply unacceptable. There's just no way around it. But like speaking for myself, for example, my daughter is biracial. Her dad is German Irish, and she's very pale and she has hazel eyes. And to just look at her, you don't necessarily know that she's black. And she has found herself in situations where she's been the only brown person in the vicinity, and people feel like, oh, let's N-word this, let's N-word that, because F N people, right? And I love her for this. I mean, she's very brave and I worry about her at the same time. But she's absolutely just like, do you not understand that I'm black? I may look like you, but my mother is absolutely black, and I'm not going to have you talking about black people like that. And why do you think it's okay to talk about people like that? So if that's happening just in private conversation, what makes people think that it's okay to do from a stage? Just because the audience is there does not mean that they're your captives. You're not there to inflict harm on people. To me, audiences want to relate to you as a person. They love like self-deprecating humor. They love your funny stories. One of the most popular stories that I have is how my husband and I coasted a car with a dead alternator down a mountain. True story. But, people want to hear that. I mean, the problem to me with punching down on people is typically it's low-hanging fruit. Everybody's doing it. People who aren't really invested in their craft are doing the punching down jokes. And so audiences not only don't want to hear it the first time, they definitely don't want to hear it the fifth time. They want to hear what you're bringing to the table. They want to hear about your experiences. They want to hear about how you are relating to this experience of life that we're having. And like I said, there's just so many ways that you can be funny without punching down. Your job is not to re-traumatize people. Your job is not to make somebody in the audience feel like they don't belong. Like you can be hilarious without, re-traumatizing somebody and causing harm. So as you're going through, as you're progressing as a comic, as you're doing shows, as you're doing mics, you will find people that your material does not resonate with. And that's kind of okay. Like, get okay with that. You're not for everybody. And your job isn't to be for everybody. Your job is to, like I said before, kind of figure out who your audience is. And, I mean, to me, more importantly, try to stay true to yourself. The thing is, sometimes those people that you aren't for gonna be real quick to tell you how awful you are, or how you weren't funny, or how you don't do this. I once had a local comic after viewing one of my videos, and this was like pretty early in the game for me. And I don't cuss a lot on stage. I feel like people don't take me seriously when I cuss, so it's just not a thing that I do a lot. And this particular video, I don't think I had cussed at all. And this comic was just like, well, you're funny, but you don't cuss enough. Like, that was the bar, was you need so many fucks in 30 seconds. I don't know. And the thing is, sometimes people give you their opinions as though they're facts. It may be factual in their mind, but that doesn't make it true. Your truth may not always be the truth. So I think it's very important early on to learn when a person is actually giving you constructive feedback versus somebody who's just being critical. Because if you're internalizing the criticism, it can definitely affect how you move forward. But there's really kind of a way to identify if this person is just being critical or if they're actually offering you some constructive feedback. Because, there's definitely times when, you may have a line and it's right there. It's so close to being funny. And especially like if you're doing a workshop or a mic, another comic is just like, hey, really enjoyed that joke. I have a tag for you. And like when I do this is the way that I do it is like I approach the person and I try to, let them know that I really feel like it has legs or, I really enjoyed this. You could possibly add this on. But I want them to feel like they have control of this conversation. And absolutely, if they're just like, well, I really kind of want to work it out for myself, then I let them have the opportunity to work it out for themselves. Like, sometimes people know that they're working on a thing and it isn't exactly what they want. So I think it's just really important that when someone is approaching you, one, they should be doing so respectfully. Like, even if you're saying the craziest stuff on stage, anyone who has watched you and appreciates the work that it takes to be a comic, even if they have something corrective, as it were, to give you, they're going to approach you respectfully. And like I said, typically when I do it, I say, hey, I really like that joke. I think, maybe this tag or, may I offer you a tag? Like I'm asking them permission to give them that feedback. But, like I said, folks who just want to be critical, like their motive has so little to do with you and giving you opportunity to improve and everything for them to, for them to feel a certain way about feeling like superior or, like in the worst case, they're just literally trying to get you to not perform anymore because they were so off put by whatever it was you said. So, yeah, don't let somebody else, be the reason that you quit comedy just because they're closed-minded about what you're trying to accomplish. So I think that to wrap all of this up, I think the most important thing to mention is you want to get at bare minimum get some sense of accomplishment or enjoyment. Like comedy can be such an enriching experience. Like you can get to meet some of the coolest people you'll ever get to know and get to go different places if that's what you choose to do. But it can also be challenging. It absolutely can also be challenging. If you start traveling, sometimes the road trips can be kind of difficult. You might be dealing with bad weather, you might be dealing with car problems. Like there's all kinds of things that could kind of take away from the glamour, as it were. There are a number of factors involved with being a stand-up comic that are not glamorous at all. If you get to a point where everything that you're doing is just so exhausting, or if you're finding your demeanor towards people changing, or everything just seems like it's just not worth the trouble, maybe it's time to take a break. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. Comedy's going to be here. But I mean, there's definitely some wonderful experiences that you can have with it. I mean, I've gotten to be around people that I never thought that I would get to hang out with, and I've gotten to see places that I never thought I would get to see, and I've gotten to see places that I never knew I wanted to see. So, in spite of having had some great experiences, getting encouragement from other people, everything, if you know in your heart that it's not feeding you the way that you need to be fed, then don't be afraid to, take a break, walk away, maybe explore something different. Whatever you have accomplished won't be unaccomplished if you stop. It just may be time, in your life to try something different. Maybe, you aren't a performance artist for a while. Maybe you want to focus on writing. Maybe you want to focus on being behind the scenes. There's, any numbers of ways to be creative, or you can just take an honest to goodness break and give yourself some space and recharge. And then that way you've, got the energy and the resources to do something else or move forward with whatever it is that you need to do. But I really just cannot think of anything that involves other people that is worth burning yourself out and ending up not being able to function and be able to be yourself once you've moved past that experience.